A large disturbance is beginning to affect New Zealand on tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for April 29th. Good evening. I'd like to begin tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin on a personal note. Today on April 28th, coming into tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin, I went through a quite interesting procedure. My vision has been extremely poor for so many years of my life, and today I've gone through laser vision correction. So tonight's bulletin are with a slightly different set of eyes, and hopefully it doesn't look too bad with how I've made it tonight, but in future you'll probably be seeing me with much less spectacle attire at least, but hopefully it should not be a compromise on the quality of our productions. I'll be resting up quite a lot, so you probably won't see me too much, but I do feel up for tonight's bulletin, and so here it is. The tropics remain relatively quiet today, although there are one or two areas of interest that we are closely monitoring for potential development. We are code blue for two systems potentially in the future, but one certainly right now in the South Pacific headed towards New Zealand, a broad system that may be acquiring subtropical characteristics. In the Atlantic, it's 35 days until hurricane season, and there's not much going on here right now. Thunderstorms brewing across the southern United States, moving up towards the northeast there, a cyclone moving along towards the northeast, a non-tropical system, and a few other areas out at sea. Here is that system in the South Pacific, a 50%, which is to the southeast of New Caledonia, really starting to affect New Zealand now. Large stormy areas in eastern Australia there as well, which is interesting, but it is just that area of interest that we've marked for the time being, that 50%, that we'll be watching closely. The big question really is whether it acquires subtropical or tropical characteristics, and then continues southwards and southwestwards, and could affect the coast of New Zealand with strong winds and quite high rainfall amounts. We'll take a look at that properly in a moment. Indian Ocean looking like this. You can see there's quite a bit of activity, just cloudiness, general thunderstorms, but nothing organised that's expected to become anything of a cyclonic nature. Latest satellite imagery, look out for the red zones for the highest rainfall dumps in the last 24 hours. A few of those areas being the southern tip of India, Indochina region, and parts of Africa, where those red zones have made themselves known at one or two various points during that sequence. And his latest satellite imagery looking at the eastern hemisphere towards the western Pacific, and there it is down towards the South Pacific. This system here that doesn't have the full tropical characteristics, quite far from it actually, is quite exposed, but it's got a circulation going and it's got strong winds of up to 50 miles per hour and a central pressure estimate of around 991 millibars. A lot of those clouds are well displaced to the south, but it could tighten up in the next 24 to 48 hours, and we could see a chance of subtropical cyclone development as it continues southwestwards towards New Zealand. It will later on tighten up even more. Sea surface temperatures will continue to decline rapidly, and we'll have to wait and see whether it manages to get to a nameable status as a cyclone. But regardless of impacts, regardless of what it becomes, impacts could be quite severe for parts of New Zealand, with strong winds and certainly heavier rainfalls, which could result in up to 8 inches, which is 200 millimeters. There's a view of New Zealand right now, some cloudiness from the system moving through already, particularly the North Island. Sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific are certainly getting quite warm now, well above 30 degrees Celsius there off the coast of Mexico and Central America. In the Atlantic, sea surface temperatures looking really good now in a few of those spots. Caribbean Sea well above 28 now, loop current looking good, and the Gulf Stream also getting up there, a little line of 26 degrees Celsius waters. Indian Ocean, northern part, very warm, over 30 degrees for a large part of the Bay of Bengal, extending up towards the Myanmar coast now. Southwest Indian Ocean continues to fade away gradually, as we expect at this late part of the season down there, dropping to about 27 now near Mauritius and La Reunion, and Rodrigues as well. The Australian region still fairly warm, but not nearly as much as what we were looking at before Cyclone Ilsa earlier this month. Temperatures there, though, still pushing close to 30 degrees Celsius, but they are really starting to noticeably fall away. And in the South Pacific, where we're looking at this potential system, is already at temperatures below 26 degrees Celsius, so it's looking unlikely it will be tropical, but it could still get to subtropical status, that system. And in the Western Pacific, temperatures looking good there, as they're continuing to build. Gulf of Thailand piping hot, but in the main area in the Philippine Sea and around the Philippine Islands, those temperatures are getting up there, and they are above average, only by a little bit, maybe 2 degrees at maximum there, as we look at this sea surface temperature anomaly chart. Atlantic well above normal, as you can see, particularly in the eastern part of the ocean, and in the eastern Pacific there across the equator, those warm sea surface temperatures continue, with that impending El Nino event becoming perhaps even more obvious. But a big cool pool there in the eastern Pacific proper, off the coast of Baja California. Oceanic heat content still looking desirable for parts of the South Pacific, only at those lower latitudes, not really any where that system is forming. Western Pacific really gearing up there now as well, around the Philippines, a very large area there, and in the Eastern Pacific, one particularly hot spot there in the far eastern part of the ocean, well above what we saw at the peak of last year. Well, this is what the GFS is showing us for the next 5 days. First of all, this Western Pacific potential system that GFS has really thrown up on its own in the last 6 hours. There comes a tropical cyclone there and then turns back southwestwards and dies off quite quickly. This has initiated already a code blue, mainly demand based, but this system could go on to affect Yap with tropical storm force winds and heavy rainfall. But let's note here, quite important, no other models are picking up on that yet, and so our team have not designated it. Here's the system near New Zealand. There it is, really getting quite broad and then establishing itself properly as it passes by New Zealand. Could be a subtropical cyclone for that whole duration there until it reaches very close to the South Island, which really would be a turn up for the books, to be honest, because very few systems make it down that far as any kind of system. So it's looking really interesting for that, and winds could get up and above 60 miles per hour or around 90 to 100 kilometers per hour across the coast of the South Island of New Zealand. And this is the rainfall expectations over the next 7 days, really creeping in there from the north, but eventually you'll see very large amounts of rainfall piling into the mountains in the west coast of the South Island. And you can see some rainfall amounts there getting up above 7 inches and possibly up to around 10 inches at most, which is 250 millimeters. On the North Island there, around 7 to 10 inches, and some of the highest amounts in Auckland, probably about 6 inches maximum, 150 millimeters. And across the South Island, you can see large amounts there, but on the eastern coast, it remains relatively dry, where some of those other cities are, Christchurch and others. Wellington probably getting only marginal, maybe some interesting amounts of rain, possibly up to about 3 or 4 inches at maximum, worst case scenario, 100 millimeters. Into the longer range, there's a doozy of a model run to look at tonight. Moderate range in the Western Pacific, day 5 to 10. This system regenerates as it moves eastwards and then northeastwards towards the Mariana Islands. My goodness, I don't think that's going to happen, but certainly you can see the signature from the original system turning eastwards again, passing Palau, and then turning northeastwards. That is just a pretty crazy track, particularly in the Western Pacific, and then moving further up towards the northeast, becoming a tropical cyclone storm for the second time. Here's another fascinating system GFS is throwing up on day 5 to 10, a very low latitude formation for a tropical cyclone in the South Indian Ocean. Wouldn't expect anything else though for this late part of the season. Forms at about 3 degrees south and then continues moving southeastwards, and then becomes quite intense, at least for the time of year, probably to category 1 status there as we get towards the 7th, 8th of May. So that is certainly another anomaly there. I'm not sure whether that that will happen. But then we have this in the same time period, day 5 through 10, looking at the area near Papua New Guinea and Indonesia particularly here, a quick spin-up tropical cyclone, extremely low latitude, in that little body of water. I'm not sure what the name of this part is. I don't think it's Flores, I think that's further west, but there it is anyway. This system really tight, wrapping up, and then shoots up and makes landfall on one of those, on that big peninsula there, on the Indonesian side. Really fascinating stuff there. You can scan the barcode and take a look at the Force 13 merch store where we have our usual products, and you can also take a look at our Still Waiting for Hone t-shirts as well as our full season and individual storm animations on request. Into the Scilly range, and less faith into this, but then we have the North Indian Ocean piping up, so I'm sure lots of people will take interest in this one. Becomes a rather powerful tropical cyclone making landfall in Myanmar around about the 11th, 12th of May there. Probably a category 3 being depicted on that, but this is very long range. I wouldn't put much stock into this at all. You can still see that the South Indian Ocean system as well on the bottom of the image there that starts to move westwards towards the end. But certainly something to watch out for in the long range. It certainly is getting into that time of year for the Indian Ocean to start grumbling. And what happens with this system? It comes back and it strengthens and it goes towards the Australian top end, Northern Territory. Significant cyclone there, making landfall there, probably a category 2 at peak, and then moving inland over the Northern Territory. So we have so many things on this long range GFS model run that happens. Really sensational, to be honest, and can't rule any of them out, but they are all quite unlikely and unusual for the time of year, apart from that North Indian Ocean system. You can discuss all of that mess on our Discord server, discord.gg/force13, for tropical weather and general weather chat around the world, with over 3,000 fellow weather watchers in our server. Don't be shy, it's waiting for you. Well, there was another turn up for the books on April 29th, 1892, an extremely devastating storm which visited Mauritius from the northwest, probably a category 3 at landfall. It did make landfall in northern Mauritius and caused devastation, killing at least 800 or 900 people and causing lots and lots of damage there as it moved southeastwards. We also had a cyclone that had formed in the Arabian Sea and was heading northeastwards towards Pakistan, where it would make landfall in the early days of May, possibly as a category 1 storm, but that analysis is pretty shaky without reanalysis at the moment. Very, very distant past. On this day then, 2023 of course, we've had 16 storms so far. In the Atlantic, the first name is Arlene. In the Eastern Pacific, it's Adrian. And in the Central Pacific, I kid you not, we're still waiting for Hone. In the Western Pacific, next up is Mawar, and in the North Indian Ocean, it will be Mocha. We may have seen a glimpse of that particular storm next week. Then again, we may have also seen Mawar there if the GFS has its way, but all of those are unlikely at this time. Around the world elsewhere though, in the Australian region, the next name is Jasper, the Southwest Indian Ocean, Fabienne, and the South Pacific, it's Lola. That's all from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. My health notwithstanding, we should have another bulletin tomorrow night.